Hey Beetle Ute Builders, SMYTH Performance Beetle Ute Builders. This video is about fitting your rear window surround. Say that 10 times fast. We're gonna cover some of the hazards and the offsets and things that you run into, little problems. There isn't that much with it, but it's more important on the rear window surround. A little bit on what tools I use where, and then where I put adhesive and how I do the different pieces. Without further ado, stick around and let's get a rear window surround fitted. This rear window surround, as you see it, is already prepped. So let's go through what I did to prep it. First thing is you got to cut these notches here. And in the mold, there's a scribe line right here. That's pretty accurate, so you can go ahead and start with that. Using that line, I take this down a little bit. I make the notch for the rain gutters, and sometimes it's already cut and sometimes it's not. This is a bigger notch than you're gonna need, but trial fit, see how it goes, open it up a little bit, try it again, process, you'll find how big you need to make that. Of course, the pieces like this piece that go inside, if you cut a little bit of an angle there and here, that makes fitting a little easier, and you can take off the gel coat there all the way across the top and then repeat on the other side. So these notches are bigger than you're gonna need, and here you can see in the mold the original markings. Start off with the original markings and work outward from there. This rear window surround gave me more trouble than I've had on a rear window surround in a while. But that makes a good one to video, so I could show you some of the troubles you might run into and you can be prepared. If you put just a little bit of taper or bring this down to maybe not a point, but take that edge down a little bit, that makes sliding it in between the steel a whole lot easier. So that's the first thing I do. Of course, on the car, I have already cleaned out the adhesive that is in between this layer here. Heat works, Sawzall blade works. My favorite is the good old, well, I've got sandpaper, self-adhesive PSA sandpaper, but the old blade here will cut the initial bit to cut the foam out, or the glue, because you're not gonna get the rear window surround in there unless you take that glue out. So then you're ready for an initial trial fit. Fit it, see where you need to go. If you're trying to slide it a little bit left and right, remember that these edges can prevent it from sliding left or right, so that you're matching the overhang on the passenger and driver side. The bottom edge is something to be aware of here on the wing. You may have to take a little bit off of here, because that can prevent it from sitting down all the way, and it also can prevent it from coming flush. And what I'm talking about is the radius on the car. Right here is a radius. So you can see the spacer that I've glued in here has that little taper on it. Because if it's a flat edge, this bottom edge will stick out a little bit. It'll catch on the bottom here. So check that. You can see that when you fit the rear window surround by looking in here to see if that's preventing. Let me see if I can demonstrate here. Left-handed. Pretend that this wedge is the rear window surround. If that piece is too long, it's going to do that number on you. So you may have to trim the bottom of the wings a little bit, or sails, or whatever you want to call them, a little bit shorter, so that that will sit in flush. But that's really one of the last fitment cuts that you're going to do. Here, as you're fitting it, the sail is probably going to sit up across the top of this, and then as you tap it in, pop down into place. This is a piece of fiberglass that I glued on before I start fitting the rear window surround. It's 2-inch by about 17 with a upward angle cut on it there for good fill. And that is simply to decrease the reveal of the rear of the door. If you look at it from this angle, well, I didn't get that latched all the way. This is from the rear window surround, from the window cutout. So you can see how much of a step down you'll have from the door to the rear window surround. So simply one layer, sanded pretty even. You'll notice that it's a little bit lumpy from being hand laid fiberglass, so take off the lumps. So now when my rear window surround comes on there, it won't be flush, but it'll be a whole lot closer from the back of the door to the front of the rear window surround. The first trial fit or second or third trial fit is also going to show you if you need any kind of spacer on the top of the front bed wall. So I have put a spacer in here. It's simply a piece of PVC and it's panel bonded down, running clamps on it. Make sure that you glue it in a position where the rear window surround will overhang it, so that is not sticking out past the rear window surround. So a couple of fitments on the rear window surround, mark it on this surface of aluminum, and then you'll know that you got to have your spacer in front of that if you need a spacer. You may find that you don't need a spacer. Occasionally, I have had to put a spacer on here also. There is that step in the rear window surround right here. It's designed to fit around the top of the quarter panel here. Occasionally you'll need a little spacer there too. Being careful not to let that spacer stick out. This one you have to screw in because there's nowhere you can get a clamp on it. Again, that's a couple of fitments down the road and seeing what you need. Once you get your fitment pretty close, it's time to place the rear window. Pretty simple, but can be tricky. I start by taking a measurement inward from the gutter to where the sunroof drain is going to be, because I know that the headliner is going to sit right here. So that distance is usually about 3 inches for a sunroof car, significantly less for a non-sunroof car. So you got to find what your non-sunroof car headliner is going to sit on. Get that measurement there. You can see it's about 3 inches, and it is about 3 inches over from the inside of the sunroof of the roof gutter. So looking back in my rear window surround, 3 inches over, 3 inches down, that's where my headliner is going to sit. For the moment, pretend that this rattle trap is not on here, because at the stage of placing your window, you have not put the rattle trap on yet. So for demonstration purposes only, here's my mark of where the headliner is going to sit, both left and right. So I want to make sure that my rear window does not sit above that line, because that will look goofy. With the rear window surround flip back over, transcribe my headliner marks onto the back, the outside, so we can work on where that window is going to sit. Remember that your window seal is going to stick up between 1/2 inch and 3/4 from the edge of the window. And you have this thickness in the center that is going to be in addition to the size of the window. So the hole you make has to be this much bigger than the window itself. We'll get into exactly sizing that. But if you take a measurement from this edge to this edge and come below your headliner marks, that's the highest you want to have the window. Now, from experience of driving one of these, if you mount the window too low, by the time you angle your rear view mirror, So let me back up. My first inclination is to have the same amount of space above and below the window. But I find that that makes the rear window too low, and when you look in the rear view mirror, all you see is in the bed or your tailgate. So I like to have the window a little bit higher than centered, and accept that it's not even, standing behind the car and looking, that it's not an even amount of space on top of and below the window. Your call of where you want to place the window, obviously, but I like to have my rear view mirror lined up a little bit better with the rear window. So, all that being said, I am shooting for as high as I can with not impeding on the headliner here. Again, that headliner mark is going to be in this vicinity, so there's my high mount brake holes mounting area. It's going to be well above the headliner. So the headliner is going to be really close to sitting on the rubber window seal right at this corner and this corner. But the window is pretty flat across the top, and the headliner has a curve. So there will be a little bit of the rear window surround showing below the headliner, above the window, right in the center. All right, placing the window in the center of this with no square shapes is really hard, because it's really hard to measure from all these tapers. That's not a vertical line. That obviously is not a vertical line. Really, the only thing you have to do is this surface is pretty close to level. So using a straight edge across the bottom, I can get a parallel line here. So I know I'm going to make my rear window bottom parallel to this ruler. You can either measure, or however you go about, and get your measurement there. Now, placing left and right is pretty tough. The best way I've found to do it is with a square sitting here and here to set that rear window in. And then in the mold, which I have now cut out, there is a little bump right in the center that designates the center of this rear window surround. So you can use that to base your left-right as a center. So you get a center mark on your window, get that center mark on the window to go across that little bump, and you'll have your window centered left and right. Takes a little bit. Next step, with the window in the exact spot, I clamp it down. I have to use a couple of blocks and a long-armed or a long throat clamp. 2 clamps on it. Your hole has to be the thickness of your window seal. This window seal is the one that comes with the kit. If you are using a different window seal, make sure you measure the window seal you're going to use. I find that the washers that come with the kit are just about perfect for matching this, oh, here we go, this distance. That little bit of meat of rubber in the middle is what the hole has to be bigger than the window. So if you lay a washer on there, and I'm doing this one-handed, it's kind of, you'll find that that is just about perfect. And by the time you do a little bit of sanding, that's going to work out perfect. So what I'm driving at is clamp your window down exactly where you want it. Double check it's where you want it. Then using a couple of washers from the kit, or whatever you determine is going to be the right distance, and a scribe, you roll those washers right along the edge of the window and scribe the line that you're going to need to cut. That works out really well. All right, just drop that washer, but it doesn't matter. Then with that line scribed where you want the window, put the rear window surround back on the car stand back here and look at it and see if that lines up with what you want and what you're hoping for. If you're happy, go ahead and cut that center piece out. And then I use that material, cut it into 2-inch strips to make these. Glue those on, use a little panel bond. If you work this to be the door gap that you want later, to match this door gap here, that gives you a guide later on when you go to fill. If your rear window surround comes up a little bit short, you can use this as a guide. So I go ahead and put a spacer in there when I clamp these down, adhering them with the panel bond to get this gap right. Be careful opening and closing your doors when you are fitting the rear window surround, because it can either pop forward and overlap the doors, or if you have the door open, it's over the gap and then you want to shut the door. Just be very careful that you're not breaking or fatiguing the sails on the rear window surround. Once I have my rear window surround fitment just how I like, I prep the inside surface and I use the old trusty flap wheel. That works real well. This is on my angle grinder to level the surface and prep it for good adhesion. I do the entire thing inside because I'm going to put this rattle trap on, and I find it's easier to put the rattle trap on for noise abatement while the rear window surround is on the bench. You can mount the rear window surround first and then put that on when it's mounted. 6 1/2 dozen. If you look here, you can see my prep work. Give yourself a sanity check looking at this edge. If I can get it to focus here. And get that edge about even. If you look at your, like you could see it's just a hair thicker. Maybe you could see it's just a hair thicker right there. Again, from hand-laid fiberglass, you'll have some small bumps. It'll make your life a lot easier if you get this pretty close to even before you go to mount it. That way your reveal on the door is going to be pretty close. Here's an example. You can see that's a low spot, right? It's a little bit shiny, and there was a high spot here and here. So I've taken that down fairly significantly. You can thin this just a little bit, and you may find that you need to thin the fiberglass here just a hair to give you a little more flexibility in these sails and on this piece, so that when you fit it, it'll sit as flush as you can get it up against the steel and minimize the gap. It's not critical at this point, but before you mount it, you will want to prep this surface for adhesion. So where am I going to use what materials to install this? I'm going to put panel bond on this surface, of course, across here, and then the same on this side. And then I'm going to use Cabasil because I have a bit of a gap under here, even with the spacer. I'm going to put Cabasil on there. So first I will do the panel bond inside on the sail, outside to fit against the roof, outside, and then inside. I'm going to fit that, clamp it into place, screw it if necessary, and then drill my holes along the bottom, put the bolts through, pack it full of Cabasil, and then tighten down the bolts just to the right torque so that the Cabasil oozes out a little bit. I know I got good fill without deflecting the rear window surround. If you over torque those bottom bolts, it will put some deflection in your rear window surround. So be careful tightening those bottom bolts. Usually I do 4 bolts across here, fairly evenly spaced. Occasionally you will need an additional bolt, 5 or 6, not for strength, but to make sure that to help you hold the rear window surround so that it's even and parallel with this line. You can use this bend. This is from the tooling mark here. You can use that as a reference. Mark it when in one of your trial fittings. You can take a pen and mark on that surface. So 4 bolts is plenty for strength, but sometimes you need a couple more. Out here, you can't get to the back side, so I'm using self-tapping screws. I usually get away with 3. One as close into the corner as I can get, one kind of centered, and then one over here. Remember, in the steel, or in the aluminum, are those 4 stainless steel bolts here. So I'm going to try to go right in the center of those. I know where those are because I made these little marks here before I put the quarter panel on. So I'm going to put one there. For getting those 3 screws in through this area, I use one of these angle drivers. I found that works best because this is really tight. Because you're going through sometimes 3 and all of the time at least 2 layers of aluminum, I do actually pre-drill them. So I have one of the drill bits that will fit into the driver, correctly undersized so that my self-tapping screws will go through. Most of the time I'm using a 1-inch, but it depends on how much spacer you had to put underneath here for how long a screw you need. So 1-inch is not always the answer. Sometimes you need something a little bit longer. But again, this one happens to be a DeWalt. There are other brands. Even my 90-degree drill is too big a head to get back in that corner. So this is the way that I have found to do it. For drilling the holes in the center, I found that a long 5/8 bit on my standard drill gives me plenty. I can do that through the window hole from standing in the bed of the truck. And the 30mm long bolts that come with the kit, depending on your spacers again. If you find you had to put a big spacer in, you may have to go buy longer bolts. But normally that 30mm bolt is plenty to reach through the rear window surround, the spacer, the aluminum, and be able to put a nut on from underneath. When you think you have the perfect fitment and you're ready to put the rear window surround on, take a deep breath and go back and check that you have everything done in there that you need to do before the rear window surround goes on. And here's the things I'm talking about. Set screw so that your sunroof, if you have a sunroof car, doesn't press against the rear window surround. So I have my set screw in, I have my sunroof drain glued in, I have it piped, and I've checked that this amount of slack will be above the headliner and fit inside the upper B-pillar cover that's going to fasten onto these. I have that routed down so I can work the bottom fitment later. This is for my bed light, and it's going to attach to the dome light that's in the headliner about here. So I have that wiring done, and I usually check that I have my third or high mount brake light wiring down and strung. It's a whole lot easier while this is all open to make sure that that wiring is all ready to go. So make sure you have that stuff done. Oh, and the bolt. Putting the bolt in to support the rear of the sunroof, right, which was one of the reasons that I even did this stepped cut in the roof. Make sure you have the surfaces in here prepped for panel bond. This is another one of those spots where I find the self-adhesive, the PSA 80 grit sandpaper on a oscillating saw or a multi-tool blade works a champ for sanding in there, getting the paint and the glue off so that your panel bond will adhere. Of course, I've had to prep this surface, and I have this prepped. I'm gonna pack that with Cabasil later, but you can't get to the surface, so now is the time to prep it. If you do a quick sanity check along this edge, sometimes during trial fitting and forcing that it's not quite fitting right, you'll actually bend those edges up a little bit or have a couple of points. Like there's just a little bit of a high point right here. I can bang those down a little bit with a big end punch and a light hammer, just going very easy. That will save you bodywork trouble later if you keep this nice. Of course, prep that edge a little bit. If you get some adhesive that comes over, that's fine, that works for you, but you want it to be on bare steel, not on paint. So I've prepped forward. Of course, as I start doing bodywork, I'm gonna take this paint off quite a bit further forward, but I don't want it to rust in the meantime, so I've only taken about an inch off there. I have pre-drilled a couple of holes here. That depends on your fitment. Some roofs, I have had to put screws all the way across. It depends on how you're fitting. If you get a nice tight fit and you really have to tap that rear window surround in and it's tight against the roof line, you can get away without having to put any screws in. That's great because that saves you the body work later. But if it sits down a little bit, you may need screws here and there to close the gap. And from my trial fitting, I know I'm gonna need to winch these down. That's gonna pull the fiberglass up and the steel just slightly down. Be careful of over torquing them, because then you can put a big dent in it and change the angle here, which can make more body work later. But it's easier to fill than it is to take steel off, right? So a little bit of a dent is okay. Remember though, that if you dent this in, it may push this up. So point being, I don't use the impact driver to drive those. I may start them with the impact driver, but I will put the final torque on them with a hand screwdriver, watching very carefully this alignment all the way across. Plenty of times I've been able to fit rear window surrounds and not have to put any screws in here. But we'll see in a little bit how this one in particular, giving me all this trouble, I'm gonna need these 3 screws to even that gap out. Here is what I hope is the final trial fit. So put all the clamps on, do all my weird winching, and as I mentioned, normally you don't have this much issues. This rear window surround wants to sit too far to the driver's side. So in an effort to keep this ledge even between the 2 sides, I've got this goofy strap on it here, but we'll talk about that in a second. So final trial fitting, this is a dry fit. I've got all my clamps sized now, so as I take them off, I'll lay them down in order, so once I have the glue out and glue's going everywhere, I can just pick them up, boom, 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 put them all in place, because sometimes you're holding something with one hand and trying to put a clamp on. Let me point out that I'm using this, it's actually just a scrap of PVC. I used to screw there to winch down those wings. If you can clamp it, why not? These deep throat, I said deep throat, these 10-inch clamps work pretty well, but the tip on them is pretty small, so you need some kind of torque load, or you're gonna induce a dent there that you're gonna body work later. So if you use something to kind of spread the load out a little bit, it makes your body work easier later. Normally I don't have this clamp here and these wedges shoved in here, but because of the way I'm winching it with the strap, it's flexing a little bit. So I'm trying to actually get the rear window surround here to match this curve here to reduce my body work later. So when I get these 2 points here lined up, this one is inset too far. So I'd have to do a pretty significant amount of fill. So what I'm shooting for is, you know, put a straight edge across there, so when I'm filling, it's fairly easy. And I've gone just a little too far. If you notice how the ruler pops out right here, and it comes in, So I need to tap that back in a little bit and pull this out towards the rear, just a hair. Everyone fits a little different, but this is a common issue. So I've got this clamp pulling that back, and then a couple of wedges to help me is in. So you really don't put any torque on the bolts here, you just snug them. And that's why I'm gonna fill it with Cabasil, overfill it, and then tighten them down a little bit. Just a little bit to prevent flexing that in. Now the window will help pull that out just a little bit, but you don't wanna go too far. Like I mentioned, this one is giving me more trouble than usual. And again, I'm trying to get this little step even on the left and right side, and it can be very deceiving because the gap is bigger on this side than the other, so it changes the appearance of the overhang. So you really have to use a straight edge in there to check what your reveal or your overhang is here. Again, screws in the inside are going to keep these even, and I'll have to push out just a little bit right here so that I'm matching this curve to this one, because there isn't anything I can do about this curve now. It's on there other than body work, trying to minimize body work. Okay, so the dry fit, you get all your clamps out, make sure you can hold that thing in place where you want it. Like I said, the strap is normally unnecessary. It's a ratchet strap I hooked in there. Used a block here so that the force is only applying there, not pulling it forward. If I didn't put this block in here, this strap was actually pulling that forward. So again, doing the trial fit. Same thing here, by keeping this block here and keeping the strap off of that surface, allows me to get the clamp on, and it keeps from forcing the rear window surround back and forth with the strap conflict there. And the strap actually just goes across to the striker on the other side. This middle clamp is the hardest to do just because the inside is right on the seatbelt. So I actually use the corner of the seatbelt bolt area. If you're on this, that clamp wants to slide off as soon as you put some torque on it. You really don't need that much torque on these. All we're trying to do is eliminate any gap in here. So we're just pinching it in just a little bit. All right, so that's my trial fit. I'm happy with it. I'm gonna accept the errors that I have. So now I'm gonna just barely pop everything loose, lay it off, give everything a good cleaning. All the surfaces that are gonna get adhesive. And then come back, put the adhesive on, and we'll put this guy back in and clamp it in exactly like it is. for joining me on this cold and drizzly day, getting a rear window surround on. I hope we provided you some ideas of how you're gonna go about it and help you make your ute a really cool looking ute, maybe save you a bunch of bodywork time also. As always, if you've got better ideas or questions, leave them in the comments below. I will get to them as soon as I can. Thanks for joining. Please like and subscribe. That always helps. Take care of each other. Catch you on the next video.